All right, welcome to The Explainer. World War II is this absolutely massive, sprawling story. So today, what we're going to do is boil it all down. We're going to look at the handful of key moments, the absolute game changers that flipped the entire war on its head.
So, let's just set the scene for a second. By 1941, things looked bleak. I mean, really bleak for the Allies. The Axis powers led by Germany seemed totally unstoppable. They had rolled over most of Europe using this shocking and terrifying new tactic called blitzkrieg, lightning war, and it was working.
So the big question is, how on earth did the Allies manage to come back from that? How did they claw their way back from the absolute brink of defeat? Well, that's what we're here to break down. First, we'll look at that unstoppable Axis advance, just to see how bad it was. Then we're going to dive into 4 critical turning points: Britain's defiance, the meat grinder of Stalingrad, the incredible ambush at Midway, and, of course, the longest day. We'll wrap it all up by looking at how the war was really lost by the Axis.
Okay, first up, the unstoppable advance. We really need to get a handle on just how dominant the Axis powers were in those early years. It was staggering.
Just look at this timeline. It's just one victory after another for Germany. September 1939, they roll into Poland, and that's it. The war is on. Then, in 1940, they pull off this move that nobody thought was possible. Everyone was expecting them to hit the Maginot Line, head on, this massive French fortification. But nope, they just went around it. They sent their panzers, their tanks, right through the Ardennes forest, a place everyone thought was impenetrable to armor. It completely outflanked the main Allied armies. Paris falls by June. And then, as if that wasn't enough, in June of 41, Hitler turns east and launches Operation Barbarossa, a colossal invasion of the Soviet Union. At that point, Britain is basically standing all alone against the seemingly invincible war machine.
But, and this is a huge but, the very first crack in that seemingly perfect Axis armor didn't come from some glorious victory. No, it came from a moment of absolute desperation. It came from a chaotic, desperate retreat.
Okay, so with France collapsing practically overnight, the entire British army on the continent, the British Expeditionary Force, was in a world of trouble. They, along with what was left of their French and Belgian allies, got pushed all the way back to the coast. They were completely trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk, with the German army closing in and the English Channel at their backs. It looked like a total catastrophe, the end of the British army.
And then, something miraculous happened. In this plan that seemed totally bonkers, Operation Dynamo, the call went out, and it wasn't just the Royal Navy. It was this incredible flotilla of civilian boats. We're talking fishing boats, private yachts, ferries, anything that could float. They sailed right across the channel, under constant fire from the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, and started picking men off the beaches. And look at that number. In just about a week, they pulled over 338,000 soldiers to safety. It was absolutely unbelievable.
Now, let's be clear. Militarily, this was a disaster. They left behind pretty much all their heavy equipment, tanks, artillery, you name it. But psychologically, it was a massive victory. It became this incredible symbol of British grit and resolve, a miracle of deliverance, as they called it. And that new spirit was perfectly captured by the brand new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, in that legendary speech. He basically told the world, and Hitler, that Britain was not going anywhere.
All right. So Britain holds on, but the next really decisive shift in the war happens thousands of miles to the east. It happens in the frozen, shattered ruins of a city named after the Soviet leader himself, Stalin. This is where German hubris slams headfirst into a wall of brutal, unforgiving reality.
You see, Hitler became completely obsessed with taking Stalingrad. Part of it was strategic. It was a key to the oil fields in the Caucasus, but a huge part of it was pure ego. He wanted to capture the city that bore his arch-rival's name, so he ordered his powerful Sixth Army to take it at all costs. But what was supposed to be a grand strategic move just devolved. It became this nightmarish, house-to-house, room-to-room slugfest in the rubble. The Germans themselves had a name for it, Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. That tells you everything you need to know about how horrific it was.
And just when the Germans thought they were on the verge of victory, the Soviets sprung an incredible trap. This is how they did it. In November of 42, the Red Army launched this massive counteroffensive called Operation Uranus. But here's the brilliant part. They didn't attack the battle-hardened Germans inside Stalingrad. No, they hit the much weaker Romanian and Italian armies that were protecting the German flanks. It was a classic pincer movement, and bam! Just like that, the entire German Sixth Army, 250,000 men, was completely surrounded. Hitler, in his arrogance, absolutely forbade them from trying to break out. He promised he'd supply them from the air. It was a promise he could never keep, and it doomed his army.
The scale of this battle is just hard to comprehend. We're talking about an estimated 2 million casualties, soldiers and civilians. It's probably the single bloodiest battle in all of human history. For Germany, this wasn't just a defeat, it was a catastrophe. They lost an entire elite army that they simply could not replace. More than that, it shattered the myth of the Wehrmacht's invincibility. From this point on, for the rest of the war, Germany was on the retreat on the Eastern Front.
So while this incredible drama is unfolding in the snows of Russia, another, completely different kind of battle is taking shape on the other side of the world. In the vast blue of the Pacific Ocean, a turning point was reached, not with tanks and infantry, but with radio intercepts and pure, brilliant cunning.
So, remember, after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Navy was just running wild across the Pacific. They seemed invincible. But behind the scenes, American codebreakers were working frantically, and they got a breakthrough. They managed to partially crack the Japanese naval code, JN-25. They started picking up whispers of a huge upcoming attack on a target the Japanese just called AF. The American command was pretty sure AF was the strategically vital island of Midway, but pretty sure isn't good enough when you're betting the entire war on it. So they came up with this genius little piece of trickery. They had the American base on Midway send out a fake, unencrypted radio message saying their freshwater condenser was broken, and they waited. Sure enough, a few days later, they intercepted a Japanese message saying that AF was low on water. That was it. The trap was set. They knew exactly where the Japanese were heading.
And the result of that intelligence coup was an absolutely devastating ambush. I mean, just look at this chart. The difference is stark. Japan lost 4 of its main aircraft carriers. The US lost 1. American dive bombers appeared out of the clouds at the worst possible moment for the Japanese fleet, right when their planes were on deck, refueling and loading bombs. It was a perfect storm. But here's the real kicker. The thing that changed the whole Pacific War. It wasn't just the ships. Japan lost hundreds of its best, most experienced veteran pilots in that one battle. You can build new ships, but you can't replace that kind of experience. Japan's naval air power never recovered. Okay, so the tide is turning. In the east, the Germans are in retreat. In the Pacific, the Japanese fleet is reeling. Now the Allies could finally focus on the great endgame in the west, launching the final decisive blow, the invasion of what they called Fortress Europe.
But this was a monumental challenge. The question was, how do you even begin to invade a fortress? Because that's what Germany had built. It was called the Atlantic Wall, a massive network of concrete bunkers, machine gun nests, artillery, minefields, you name it. It stretched for thousands of kilometers along the coast, and it was designed for one purpose: to throw any Allied invasion right back into the sea.
So, what was the Allied answer? Deception. An absolutely epic campaign of deception called Operation Fortitude. They literally created a phantom army, a ghost army commanded by the famous General George Patton, who the Germans feared most. They set up inflatable tanks and dummy airplanes in southeast England, right across from Pas-de-Calais. They filled the airwaves with fake radio traffic. They even used double agents to feed phony intelligence to the Germans. The entire goal was to convince Hitler and his generals that the real invasion was coming at Calais, which was the most logical and shortest route across the Channel.
And you know what? It worked. It worked beyond their wildest dreams. The real target was Normandy all along. And on June 6, 1944, D-Day, the largest seaborne invasion force in history hit the beaches. The German High Command was caught completely off guard. In fact, the deception was so good that even after the Normandy landing started, Hitler kept some of his most powerful panzer divisions held back, waiting for the real invasion at Calais that was never going to come. That hesitation gave the Allies the crucial time they needed to establish a foothold. The Second Front was finally open.
So as we look back, it's easy to see these turning points as just a series of brilliant Allied victories. But that's only half the story. They were also the direct result of a cascade of critical mistakes made by the Axis powers themselves.
When you really boil it down, a whole series of catastrophic miscalculations sealed Germany's fate. We saw how Hitler's personal meddling led to disaster at Stalingrad, and how his being fooled by the Normandy deception was crucial. There was also this gross underestimation of their enemies. They never believed the Soviet Union could absorb such massive losses and fight back, and they completely failed to grasp the sheer industrial power of the United States. And of course, trying to fight a massive two-front war against both of them at the same time was just a logistical nightmare that stretched their resources, like oil, way too thin. On top of all that, as we saw with Midway and the Enigma code, the Allies consistently had better intelligence. It all added up to a losing formula.
So that leaves us with one big question to think about. Out of all these incredible moments, which one do you think was the true turning point? Was it Dunkirk, the moment of defiance that kept hope alive? Was it Stalingrad, the brutal battle that just bled the German army dry? How about Midway, that brilliant intelligence victory that crippled the Japanese Navy? Or was it D-Day, the overwhelming show of force that started the final chapter? You could make a case for any of them, really. Each one was an absolutely vital link in the chain that led to Allied victory. It's definitely something worth pondering.